Well, recognizing it's a Friday afternoon, thank you all very much for coming to join us for today's CASO panel on key issues in Southeast Asia, partners, allies, and China. My name is Dr. Robert Davis, the Associate Dean of Academics. I'm not very important, so I'm going to get out of here pretty quick. I wanted to welcome you all today to the Cultural Area Studies Office, supported by CGSC, Army University. We appreciate the support from the PAO's office and VCO and all the other elements of Army University and CGSS who have assisted with today's panel. We have had an excellent series of panels running on the challenge of China, the global challenges we face with China around the world. And today we get to highlight the strength of our faculty and our student body and our partners. And so it's a real treat today to have this particular panel with Lieutenant Colonel Dave McCaughrin from DJMO, Lieutenant Colonel Phil Kerber from DJMO, and Major Petrus Prabowo from Indonesia, one of our partner countries. I'm not going to steal any of his thunder by telling any bad jokes. And I have Dr. Mahir Ibrahimov, the director of CASO, for a bit of that too, who will be serving as today's moderator. I do want to read, and make sure I get this right, our caveat for today. This is being televised and broadcast and will be posted to the CASO website for later use. The opinions and discussion points during the session are those of the speakers and the moderator and do not necessarily represent official positions of the United States government or our partner countries' governments. So with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Ibrahimov.
Good afternoon. Thank you, sir, for your support. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today for our next CASO session. U.S. Army Cultural and Area Studies Office, CASO, Command and General Staff College, continues series of panel discussions amid its other events. Today, CASO is conducting its next Asia-Pacific session with specific focus on Southeast Asia and U.S. national security. Next slide, please. To set the stage, I would like to provide a quick overview of the region. Southeast Asia is comprised of 11 countries of impressive diversity in religion, culture, and history. Brunei, Burma or Myanmar, Cambodia, Timor-Leste, Indonesia, Laos, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. Collectively, Southeast Asia represents the world's fifth largest economy, with a market of nearly 700 million people and high growth rates with nominal GDP of about $3.317 trillion. To address the national security challenges posed by China as the pacing threat, the United States is partnered with many nations in the region and deals with them bilaterally, multilaterally, and through international organizations such as the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, many of you probably heard about or know about it, which includes most of the previously mentioned countries. Other multilateral arrangements that impact the region include the Quad, India, Japan, Australia, and the United States, the AUKUS, the Trilateral Security Partnership between Australia, UK, and the US, and the Shangri-La Dialogue, the premier security summit in the region. These are additional examples of the multidimensional approach of US efforts in the Indo-Pacific, given the complexity of the region. Does that make sense so far, or it doesn't make any sense? It does? Okay. All right. Next slide, please. During the previous session, we did not have enough time to solve all the issues related to Indo-PACOM. That's why this distinguished panel will try to solve them today. Nothing to do with me. You have to solve them. Before turning the floor to the first speaker, we would like to invite our outstations to start submitting their questions and comments when ready via our CGSC Facebook live stream so that we could convey them to the panel to generate the discussion during Q&A session. With this, and without further ado, I would like to yield the floor to Lieutenant Colonel Dave McCaughrin, who will review the history of China's relationships with Southeast Asia, as well as key issues and considerations from Beijing's perspective in the present. Colonel McCaughrin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. I. Next slide, please. Next slide. I think it's important to begin with a bit of history, and we'll start with China's conception of itself. The Chinese word for China is Zhongguo, which literally translates central country or middle kingdom. And this has long been the theme of how China thinks of itself in terms of its relations in East Asia and to a lesser extent globally. In the West, we tend to conceive of international relations in a Westphalian context. Hugo Grotius and others started to propagate this idea of equality of all states, excuse me, and this idea never really took root in East Asia. The Chinese emperor was ascribed the title of Tianzi, literally son of heaven, meaning that he was an enlightened ruler above all other rulers in the region. And while other countries, the near barbarians in the Chinese vernacular, did exist around China's periphery, China was the center of civilization and culture, and as a result, other countries were expected to be deferent to the Son of Heaven and the imperial court. As early as the Tang Dynasty, which is roughly the 8th and 9th century AD, there are historical anecdotes of emissaries from the nations surrounding China bringing tribute to the Son of Heaven and the imperial court. And these were often responded to in kind. If you brought gifts to the imperial court, you would receive gifts in return. And a lot of these surrounding states would exploit this to their profit. They would bring gifts and receive gifts of much higher value from the imperial court. But there was still a symbolic act of obedience to the Son of Heaven that was symbolized by a ritual called the koto, literally head knock, which we anglicize as kowtow. And emissaries from these surrounding kingdoms from today's Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and as well as Korea would come and pay tribute to the Son of Heaven, cycling through multiple imperial dynasties. And finally, the Ming Dynasty in about the 15th century put a stop at least to what they deemed as excess of tribute. They recognized that the imperial treasury was getting drained and limited other surrounding nations to only sending once a year, once every 3 years, on a routine cycle, such that there was not this constant pressure to respond in kind to tributary gifts. Importantly, with the Ming Dynasty, the Yongle Emperor, one of the early emperors of the Ming Dynasty, had a keen interest in getting to know more about some of these surrounding near barbarian nations. And he launched a large fleet under Admiral Zheng He, who was actually a general, that he was put in charge of a fleet of treasure ships that sailed along the entirety of the Southeast Asian coast all the way over to India and even East Africa. And they would also do gift exchanges. This fleet was enormous. These ships were far larger than any built elsewhere in the world at that time. And by sheer overawing would generate more gifts and more deference from these surrounding nations to the imperial court. It wasn't always that peaceful, though. Some of these surrounding nations would appeal to the imperial court to intervene on their behalf in disputes. One particularly noteworthy during the Ming Dynasty and roughly the Zheng He era was a claimant to the throne of Annam, the predecessor state to present-day Vietnam, sought the backing of the Ming Dynasty in its pursuit of the throne. And the Ming Dynasty sent a large army into Vietnam that spent 20 years down there trying to secure the throne for this particular claimant. In the end, the rival claimant succeeded in defeating the Ming army and drove them back into China, which was China in Vietnam round 1. Not the first time that China went into Vietnam and things ended badly. The Ming Dynasty was the last ethnic Han dynasty in China. The one that followed them, the Qing, was actually from the Manchus, who were an ethnic group in present-day northeast China. And they were the first dynasty to conceive of China as more than just an enlightened kingdom of the Han. They were more interested in a multi-ethnic empire. And once they consolidated control over China, they pushed the geographic size of China out to roughly where it is today. Under the Qianlong Emperor, who was kind of the pinnacle of Qing power, they were very successful in pushing out in the north and west. They captured present-day Xinjiang and Tibet, but they were less successful going to the south and east into Southeast Asia. They fought a war with Burma that ended badly because the entire Chinese army caught yellow fever or something akin to it, and the loss to disease was so great that the Qing army had to retreat back into Yunnan. Again, they went into Vietnam. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. The Qianlong Emperor sent a huge army down into Vietnam, again to intervene on a dispute over the throne of Annam. Were defeated by a surprise attack during Tet, also known as Chinese New Year, just the Vietnam version thereof. And again, China went back into China with their tail between their legs, having been defeated in Vietnam. So fast forward another couple hundred years, the Qing dynasty atrophies for a number of years. European powers begin to intrude upon China, seeking initially better trade relations, but it starts what's known as the Century of Humiliation. China begins to get picked on, and this idea of the Middle Kingdom starts to get punctured as other countries with better military technology start to abuse China, and its position of leadership really begins to get threatened. And China tries to push back. The Qing dynasty tried to modernize its army. They actually sent one back into Vietnam in 1884 to attempt to defend their position from France, who was trying to take over Vietnam and create French Indochina, and the Qing army actually held its own. They defeated the Chinese, or rather did the French at Long Son in present-day northern Vietnam, but because of their naval inferiority, the Chinese had to negotiate with the French, and Annam and other areas were ceded to French control to become Indochina. Fast forward to 1949 at the communist takeover. It was important to Chairman Mao that China extend out to where it had been under the Qing dynasty. And he and several other leaders of newly independent countries, former colonial possessions, held a conference at Bandung in Indonesia in 1955 that really set forth some rules of the road. And this was China coming out to the world and saying, we are not the Soviet Union's little brother. We are communists, but we are rather a champion of the third world. And together with President Sukarno of Indonesia, Prime Minister Nehru of India, among other leaders, they propagated these 5 principles of peaceful coexistence that were sort of a theme for how the third world would relate to and with one another, among which was no interference in each other's internal affairs. Well, apparently sponsoring Maoist revolutionaries in other countries didn't fall under that category in the eyes of the communists. They were very active in supporting revolutionary parties all through Southeast Asia, as well as other parts of what Mao called the third world. Sometimes that backfired. One of their more successful endeavors, if you want to call it that, was the support of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. the Khmer Rouge abused the Vietnamese minority in Cambodia so badly that Hanoi, who was backed not by Beijing but by Moscow, decided to take action and invaded Cambodia, took out the Khmer Rouge, which was a grave insult to the Middle Kingdom. So by this point, Mao had passed on, Deng Xiaoping had succeeded him, and while at a summit in Washington, D.C. with then President Carter, said, we're going to teach Vietnam a lesson. Enter China into Vietnam, round 3. Third verse, same as the first. They had the PLA had limited operational objectives, but it was at best a Pyrrhic victory. The PLA limped back into China, having suffered far more than it inflicted against a battle-hardened, incapable People's Army of Vietnam. So, present day, as you have probably heard of, Xi Jinping, when he assumed power in 2012, 2013, propagated the Yi-Dai Yi-Lu, or One Belt, One Road initiative, that was seen as a way to both assert China's soft power and also provide infrastructure development in Southeast Asia and other countries where there wasn't a lot. However, this hasn't always been a smooth road. They have been able to attract a lot of investment. Next slide, please. And make some deals with governments. However, there's been backlash, particularly noteworthy. The Najib Razak regime in Malaysia was voted out of power because they were seen as too hand in glove with the Chinese. There continue to be disputes. China needs a lot of power to support its economy. Hydroelectric dams on the upper reaches of rivers are a perfect solution until you realize how much that affects the riverborne economies downstream in Southeast Asia. And there continue to be territorial disputes. We could have a whole separate panel on the South China Sea. I won't get into that except to note that those are ongoing territorial disputes with Southeast Asian countries. So there's a bit of a carrot and stick approach from Beijing's standpoint now. And in closing, China loves to press bilateral relations. They're aware of ASEAN. They claim to support ASEAN, but when it comes right down to brass tacks, particularly Laos and Cambodia are such client states of China in terms of investment and political influence that it's very, very hard for ASEAN as an entity to establish any kind of unity to deal with China. That concludes my remarks for the moment. I look forward to your questions, and I will defer to Colonel Kerber for his comments.
Thank you, Colonel, for the great presentation. Next slide, please. The next speaker is Lieutenant Colonel Phil Kerber, who will briefly provide some additional strategic context concerning Southeast Asia and its importance to the United States, along with current and future challenges and opportunities facing our security relationships in the region. Colonel Kerber, the floor is yours.
Great. Hey, thank you, Dr. I. Hey, thank you, everybody, for coming on Friday. Actually, a much bigger group than I think we anticipated. Shows your interest in this strategic part of the world, so thank you for being here. I also want to thank the school for taking a moment in this world that we're currently in, where most of the collective attention is focused on Ukraine and the Middle East, and telescoping back and telescoping in on another strategic part of the world. I think it's very important when you think about the holistic approach that we take when it comes to education here at CGSC. So I've been asked to provide, as mentioned, a broad overview of Southeast Asia. That is not an easy thing to do. Southeast Asia is extremely diverse. It's very dynamic. It's a very challenging and fascinating part of the world, but I'll attempt to do so. So first, let me say this map, next slide, I think is a good representation of what we think of when we think of Southeast Asia. You know, the 11 nations that Dr. I highlighted. You know, the eastern periphery there is the Philippines, western, you know, Myanmar, northern. We've got 3 Southeast Asian nations that have a land border with the PRC. And we've got, of course, Indonesia and Timor-Leste down in the south. It's a very strategic location. It's between 2 continents, Asia and Australia, and it's a place where we absolutely need to be in the context of our allies and partners. We're 5,000 miles from Manila to Honolulu, about 7,000 miles from the West Coast to Manila. If that doesn't breathe, smell, look like strategic terrain in this day and age of great power competition, I don't know what does. It's important. It's important. It's very strategic. It's very diverse. When we speak about Southeast Asia, we're speaking about a region that has tremendous differences. You've got more, from a religious standpoint, you got more Catholics in Southeast Asia than you have in Italy, Spain, and Portugal combined. You've got the largest Muslim nation in Southeast Asia. You've got huge Buddhist influences. There's more Buddhists, practicing Buddhists in Southeast Asia than in India. From a government standpoint, you got huge diversity in governments. You've got everything from democracies, communist regimes, monarchies. It's a very, very diverse region. Not to mention the amazing Hindu architecture that you'll find as far away as in Vietnam. I highly recommend, if you have an opportunity with your family, to visit. It's a beautiful region to see, and there's so much diversity. It's easy to get lost in. Dynamic, it's very dynamic. 3.5 trillion regional GDP. It's been growing significantly over the past several decades. Singapore is a case in point. The GDP, the economy of Singapore has quadrupled in the past 20 years. Indonesia's got $1 trillion economy, catching up with the likes of Spain, greater than Turkey. The future of the U.S., I think, has been made very clear in various strategic documents, is intertwined in Indo-PACOM. A good chunk of that is right here in Southeast Asia. There's also a lot of instability and challenges in Southeast Asia. You've got an ongoing civil war in Burma, a significant refugee crisis potentially burgeoning there and across the border in Bangladesh. There's over 1 million refugees in camps in Bangladesh due to the conflict taking place in Myanmar, in Burma. You've got off and on low intensity conflict. You know, you got some, we've had a significant counterterrorism partnership with the Philippines for years. We've got a CT partnership with Singapore. Terrorism is an issue in Southeast Asia, depending on where you are. There's ecological challenges in Southeast Asia. You know, you've got Dave mentioned earlier, the Mekong River challenges with the damming. You've got, again, we can go on and on about the South China Sea and the challenges that are going on there with the dredging and the reclamation. The point is, it's a dynamic region. There's a lot of things going on across the spectrum of consideration when you look at a region and you look at nations. It's exciting. In that map, we don't have a single U.S. base. We don't have bases in Southeast Asia anymore. But what we do have is allies and partners. And we have some great ones. We've got the Philippines, Thailand, we've had alliances with since the 1950s. We've got strategic partners, most recently Vietnam. This last year was elevated to a strategic partnership. And that is a huge high point in terms of the region and how we look at it. So why does any of this matter? It matters because we say it matters. It's articulated in our NSS, our National Security Strategy. We mentioned Southeast Asia, Indo-PACOM strategy, and we're committed to a free and open Indo-Pacific. And we've said that many times in many various strategic forums, and we'll say it again. And Southeast Asia is a very important part of that initiative. This is an Army-centric region. Command General Staff College, we're Army-focused. Every single one of the CHODs, the Chiefs of Defense, last time I checked, were Army. So you look at a map like this and you think, okay, a lot of maritime, a lot of blue. It's an Army-centric part of the world. So it's important we stay engaged, and it's important that we do things like this where we take a moment and we look at the region and we explore the possibilities that it presents. Next slide, please. So I want to talk briefly about some of the opportunities. Already highlighted trade. Trade is huge. A lot of opportunity there. You may have heard of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. A lot of opportunity with the 7 partners of those countries, the 7 partners that are involved in IPEF. You know, we're looking at 40% of the global GDP. We have huge security cooperation relationships in Southeast Asia. We've got incredible exercises. You've probably heard of the Pacific Pathways iteration that USRPAC runs. We've got Cobra Gold. This last year was the 42nd iteration of Cobra Gold in Thailand. 7 different countries, 20 different observers. Bali Ketan in the Philippines, this last year was the 38th iteration. We had over 17,000 U.S. Armed Forces of the Philippines and multilateral partners in the Philippines executing Bali Ketan this last year. Not to mention we had Patriot missiles, we had HIMARS, we had cyber elements to that. That just highlights the amount of investment we're placing in our relationships throughout the region to ensure what? To ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. We've also got tremendous defense procurement relationships in Southeast Asia. Singapore's buying F-35s. They've purchased F-16s. Indonesia has Apaches. We've transferred Coast Guard cutters to the Philippines, to Vietnam. Philippines has C-130s. We've got a tremendous FMS relationship, security cooperation relationship with Southeast Asia, and it's nothing to look down on. Access and cooperation, you know, again, I mentioned the exercises. We have tremendous access there, but it goes both ways. Our partners and allies, they have access to us. We have the Joint Pacific Multinational Readiness Center in Hawaii and up in Alaska. We bring partners there every year. Some of our partners train in the U.S. Singapore, they train pilots in Arizona. So that just kind of highlights, in my view, the depth and breadth of our cooperation with this region, and highlights really the strength. Challenges. It's not without challenges. Again, our focus is to ensure that we can have free access, the world can have access, you know, sail, fly, wherever international law allows. And in recent years, we've seen some challenges to that with our competitor. There's also territorial and resource disputes, and then we have challenges with individual domestic priorities of the countries that, you know, in question. We do have limitations. We don't ask countries to choose between us and the PRC. In one sense, maybe that's a limitation. Maybe we should, but we don't, because we don't believe in a zero-sum game when it comes to relationships and opportunities. Our values are our strength. You know, we believe in democracy, the United States does. Sometimes our version and our importance that we place on democracy doesn't necessarily align with our partners, with the countries in Southeast Asia. Sometimes that can be viewed as limiting. Dave mentioned earlier the ASEAN way, consensus. It's hard to engage ASEAN to pursue a multilateral objective when everybody has to be in consensus. That sometimes is considered a limitation. So looking forward, again, we will continue to, as the United States, will continue to push ASEAN centrality. We engage the region largely through ASEAN, through our multilateral relationships. We do have these forums that we participate in. You know, we have the ASEAN ADMM, ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting every year. We have the ASEAN Regional Forum. We have the Shangri-La dialogues, and we seek relationship enhancement. That's what we're seeking. It's time, you can say, to modernize alliances such as Thailand and the Philippines. I think there's a lot of effort and energy and ideas behind that. And I think from an economic standpoint, there's potentially a lot of opportunity in Southeast Asia. You know, we know about the tariffs. You've heard about the tariffs and the challenges, the competition with China. As that continues, there may be more and more businesses and opportunities as stuff gets pushed out of China. Where's it going to go? Conceivably, a lot of that's going to go to Southeast Asia. Lastly, when it comes to an economic standpoint, we got a growing middle class in Southeast Asia. Anticipated $1.5 billion in the Indo-PACOM AOR before 2030, and a significant number of that being in Southeast Asia. So I think those are some of the key things I wanted to highlight in my broad overview of Southeast Asia. It's a dynamic, it's a diverse region, but we have strong relationships between our allies and partners, and the opportunities that they present moving forward in the future, I think, are something to look forward to. So I think that's all I have, Dr. I, for my portion. Look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Colonel, for very interesting analysis. Next slide, please. Our next speaker is Major Petrus Prabowo, who will offer insights into the background of Indonesia, which is the world's largest archipelagic country, the world's largest, situated in Southeast Asia. He will address the current challenges that the country is grappling with, while also shedding light on the future opportunities that lie ahead. Major Prabowo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. I. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. It's an honor for me to sit here as a panel with two of my instructors here. Dr. I told me to not be panic or stressful sitting with my instructor, so yeah, no stress at all. So yeah, so my name is Petrus Prabowo. I'm currently a student here at Staff Group 11 Charlie. Next slide, please. Yeah, before I start my presentation, I'm talking regarding of the presidential election in Indonesia, like this currently happening here, because like everyone keep like making it not as a joke, but like keep congratulate me, like especially like for example like Dr. Davis told me like, hey, congratulations, your dad becoming president. So I mean like there's a lot of happening in Indonesia. So I mean like one of the candidate people refer him as Mr. Prabowo. So there's a bit of cultural difference here in Indonesia. So Indonesia, we can say the first name of people in as a formal way to call people. So Mr. Prabowo, the one that is currently running as a president, his first name is Prabowo. So me, like back in Indonesia, they will call me like Mr. Petrus. So Prabowo is my family name. So to be clear, that I have no relationship with him, but yeah, I'd love to have a relationship with him. Yeah. Next slide, please. I will start my presentation by giving a bit of background of my country. First, we're located in the Southeast Asian nations. We will have two seasons. We're located on the equator. We only have like dry and monsoon, which is very perfect for like agricultural, tourism. Like every year, like throughout the year, we can have like a pretty good season to do a lot of that things. Talking about archipelagic state, so archipelagic state is like a country that is made up a lot of islands. So we have like around 18,000 islands. The numbers keep changing because like the sea level, but I would say safely to say it's 18,000, which only like 6,000 of it is inhabited. And having those number of islands mean that we have also different typologies. People always think about country in Equator will only have like jungle, but we also have mountains, cities, even we have snows that always there throughout the year. And looking at the area of territory, we can say, I'll try to give a size comparison with the USA on the bottom picture. You can see it's pretty big. If we compare to the Europe, it will span from UK through Turkmenistan, I think. So it's pretty big, but most of that territory is water. It will furthermore create a challenge that I will explain to you later. Population, we have like 280 million populations, and most of them, they only live in 6 big islands in Jakarta, in Indonesia, with the capital in Jakarta. There are at least 13,000 ethnic groups and 700 indigenous languages. Talking about indigenous language, 100% different between one another, but I can say to you that almost everyone in Indonesia, even you come to the most remote area, they will be able to speak Indonesia, which is our national language. And another fun fact is like, whenever I met someone new, they always think that Indonesia is a Muslim country. Yes, we have the biggest Muslim population in the world, but we're not a Muslim country. We're a democratic country. We still have we call it like traditional religion or belief, and we still acknowledge that as religion. So, and regarding the foreign politics, we uphold free active policy. So free active policy here means that we don't have alliances and we don't have enemy. We consider like every country around the world as a partner, so we can try to maintain good relationship. We can see that we can try to find something that can benefit one another. In doing that, we can join the organizations such as UN, G20, APEC. I think the latest one, we're trying to join the OECD in the future. We're already talking about that. And regarding our military power, we have like 900,000 active reserve, and we support the civilian to support the domestic and foreign missions. One unique thing about our military is about our organization. We have an organization called Territorial Command or Regional Command, which is responsible to, so the task of this command is to work together with the local civilian government, talking about addressing some problems, social, economic. Even you can see that some soldiers, even in the remote area, you can see them teaching kids in a remote area or support the local economy. We have that kind of organization led by a 2-star general in every province. Next slide, please. Moving toward the challenges currently faced by Indonesia, we're located at the Ring of Fire. As you can see on the left picture, we located right in the middle of the ring, which is very beautiful. It's perfect for us, which means that because we have 69 active volcanoes. Having the volcanoes means that we don't have any choice to be friendly with all of the natural disasters. So earthquake is pretty common things, flood, and wind, strong winds, even the most catastrophic ones. If you remember in 2004, we have a very strong tsunami that struck our country, kills around 100,000 of people. Talking about the huge natural resources we tend to have dependency on export commodity. That means that we're pretty vulnerable with the global price fluctuations. You can see on the picture on the right that the number of our exports is pretty high compared to our import numbers. Meaning that whenever the oil price or other commodity price fluctuated, it will also affect to our economy as well. Social cohesion, of course, is still a challenge. We're talking managing 280 millions with different backgrounds, policy. Creating policy that being able to make everyone happy is going to be so hard. Some policy will be good to be executed in this area, but not in all areas. So the government will have a lot of hard time to create the policy that could benefit everyone. Regarding the South China Sea dispute, not only are we directly impacted by it at our north part of Indonesia, we're currently already changing our the territory. We used to call it South China Sea, but Indonesia part, we already call it North Natuna Sea in order to make sure that that is our territory. But again, not only that, it's also will affect the stability in our region, the tourism sectors, the economy in other areas will be impacted as well if we cannot assure people that we have the stability that can be maintained. And talking about the infrastructure as well, dispersed island also create other issues. Government needs to spend much effort to build equal development in all islands, find the most efficient way to connect all the people along that island so that the country economy can always be increased. Next slide, please. However, looking forward, Indonesia see a lot of opportunities to achieve our era. Our government call it Golden 2045. Actively participate in the world peace. We understand that by maintaining the stability in the region, we took part in it. Our country understand that our area, especially Indonesia, is a key international shipping lanes. Like in the picture, it creates opportunity to build infrastructure to support this maintain the partnership, increase the partnership with other countries so we can also benefit from this. We also have lands that are rich by natural resources, by oil, gas, minerals, and other produce, potential for the renewable energy, green. And also with the big number of population, we can provide huge manpower for manufacturing and industries. This can also support the tourism. And talking about tourism, I think most of you only know about Bali. Even some people think that Indonesia is part of Bali. So actually Bali is just one small island in Indonesia that is beautiful and pretty well known. But talking about tourism, there's hundreds of islands over there that have like very good tourist attraction for you. The free active policy that our policy provides opportunity for Indonesia. We can achieve goals with other partner nations, achieving security stability and other stability. For example, like for the security, we can do joint patrol with neighboring country. And I think Indonesia already starting to initiate the joint military training with all of the Asian countries. And then, like Gruder Shield exercise mentioned by Colonel Kerber before, from previously only Indonesia and the U.S., I think from the last couple of years, we invited a lot of countries. I think currently we have like 14 countries joining the exercise. And building the military with this free active policy, it's kind of unique. You will never see an Air Force formation flying together, a pair of F-16 fly together with an Su-30. That only happened. I think it's only happened in Indonesia because based on this policy, we have that kind of benefit. Like we have relationship not only with the U.S., we have also have a good relationship with Russia, China, people around the world. We send students for the staff college to not only to the U.S., Singapore, all of the country, including Russia, China, a lot of the countries. And then that will also help us to build our defense. We have the F-16, we have Su-30, we have Leopard tank from Germany, we have Apache, we also have like Mi-35. So that's kind of how our policy can help us to develop our, to increase our defense capability. And lastly, growing middle class and growing productive age populations also can provide the opportunity for Indonesia to improve the economy and other sectors. Next slide. I think to sum it all up, Indonesia's strength can also pose a threat if the government made the wrong decisions. And as our constitutions dictates us, like we must always maintain good relationship, partnership with other countries around the world. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Ai.
Thank you, Major, for very informative presentation. Next slide, please. Now is the time for the most fascinating stage of our sessions, which everybody loves. A lot of energy, action, which is Q&A, questions, answers, and comments. So that's why we always try to save at least roughly 1 hour for Q&A, the last hour. To generate a discussion, and as a matter of summary of the panel's initial presentations, I would like to ask the first 2 questions. You ready for the questions? Is it not scary? What questions I'm going to ask? Why is the Southeast Asia region is of great geopolitical? Dave, the impression on your face. Anyways, economic and strategic importance for both Indo-PACOM region and worldwide, including the U.S. national security objectives. This is the first question. Should I repeat or is it clear? Clear, okay. And the second question is, how should we best build our strategic relationships with our partners, as well as potential partners, major regional players in the Southeast Asia region? So the floor is now of the panel. Colonel McCaughrin, would you like to begin with the answer, please?
Okay. Well, in terms of Southeast Asia's geopolitical importance, one scholar referred to Southeast Asia as China's strategic throat. It is a very highly populated, diverse, and economically a very high economic potential region that is adjacent to China, and Beijing has a vested interest in stability and good relations with neighbors on its borders. Likewise, the U.S. as well, to maintain presence in Asia, even though we don't have any physical basing infrastructure there. Having good relations with those Southeast Asian countries is a key way to kind of keep the U.S. Involved in Asia. In terms of how to continue to build relations, I think the thing the U.S. needs to do, and Phil alluded to this earlier, is not to force a choice. We don't need to say you're with us or against us to the Southeast Asian nations. They are so economically intertwined with China that we would find forcing a choice, I think, blowing up in our face. So that's my take on the question, and I'll defer to my panel colleagues for
Anybody
their
else
thoughts.
from the panel? Colonel Kerber or Major Prabowo?
Yeah, I might say a few things on that. I think we alluded to a lot of this in the discussion or in the briefs, but, you know, I think it's always good to look back at the national security strategy. You know, national security strategy makes it very clear that, you know, we need to outcompete the PRC. That's what we're in the business of doing. We're in the business, not in conflict with the PRC. We're not asking anybody to choose the PRC, but we are dictated to outcompete the PRC across all fields. And that is, I think, what we are really trying to do, not just in Southeast Asia, but really around the world. And why? Because we see the world differently. You know, there's a different view in how we look at the world, and we believe in the rules-based system that has reinforced the decades and decades of economic progress throughout the world. And we believe in that rules-based system, and we believe in outcompeting the PRC in that regard in Southeast Asia. We also believe in integrated deterrence, and we believe in, again, in a free and open Indo-Pacific. That is, again, those are some of the principal reasons why Southeast Asia is important. It is competitive space.
Excellent. Excellent discussion. Major Prabowo, would you like to add?
Something from Colonel Kerber. I think that word rule-based order is very important, especially like, remember about when we talk about the numbers of the money that flow around that region that's so big, which is like if we don't have that, maintain that world rules-based orders, will always going to affect the world monetary as well. And I think if you want to talk the second question about what the U.S. should do, I think not only by diplomacy, I think if you want to talk about, I want to highlight about the public trust here. If I can see, it's my personal opinion. A lot of people like in Indonesia, like especially for those who's not really have a like pretty big exposure with the Western country or the U.S. So people in Indonesia, I think the majority of them, they have the same, I wouldn't say suspicious, but they will see the U.S. and China in the same way in terms of the suspicious. Talking about the U.S., like back in the 1950, there's a rebellion in Indonesia that is supported by the U.S. And back in 1965, there's also like a communist rebellion in Indonesia. So like communists, Indonesian people, whenever we heard about communists, it's kind of sensitive. Like, so whenever the government's trying to conduct some cooperation with the Chinese government, Indonesian people like will say that it's a communist or something like that. So I think generating public trust is the most important thing that U.S. should do. I can say that it's important. I think it can build in a lot of ways. For example, like I'm lucky that I have a lot of exposure with the American people. Like I've done a lot of like GSET exercise with the First Special Forces Group. I've done some exercise. Even one of the students here in CGSC we met before in Jakarta. We have do some exercise in Garuda Shield, and he was in his 5th SFAB, so we already know each other's. And again, talking about the Garuda Shield, I think I remember back in 2021 and before that years, I think Garuda Shield only happens only between Indonesia and the U.S. But since 2021, I think when our Chief of Army or Chief of Armed Forces, which is General Andika Prakasa, he had a good relationship with one of the general in the U.S. Army, and then at that time, they feel that this exercise could be better in the future, and then by doing that, I think from that point, so the Garuda Shield, he changed the name to Super Garuda Shield. So the exercise where, I think before General Andika was the Chief of Armed Forces, it was only like a company and a company. I think after that year, the exercise is like a brigade with Apache and everything. And also I think this year we're gonna have 14 countries. I think that kind of trust, that kind of continuity trust, if we get a lot of exposures about how people will think, will be changed as well. That's what I think.
Excellent, distinguished panel, great answers. Now the floor is yours. We'll begin with Arnold and then move towards the outstations via CGSC Facebook Live with the help of Ms. Hauk, Public Affairs Office. So please introduce yourself, ask a question or make a comment. For those in the back of the room, please use these 2 microphones. So now the floor, who has the first question? Dr. Babb, please.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Babb from the History Department. I'm the China historian. I'd like to dig into Burma. I had the opportunity to be there in 2016 and walk around, something I probably couldn't do today. From the China perspective, Burma, from the U.S. perspective, what should we be doing about Burma right now? And I think what you might argue is the biggest flashpoint right now there. Disagree with that. And then from the Indonesian perspective, what do you think the United States should do about Burma? So, thank you.
Great question, great question. Who would like to begin?
I'll start.
Colonel McCaughrin, please.
China has a keen interest in regional stability, but I think sometimes that they will also not hesitate to play certain groups off one another. The current junta that has more or less run Burma, really with a few interruptions here and there since it gained independence in 1948, they are somewhat of a client state of China's. They have received a lot of economic benefits. The Chokfu pipeline runs across Burma. As you can see on the map, it runs across Burma near Yangon into southeast China, southwest China rather, near Kunming, and is a key way for China to get petroleum without having to send tankers through the Strait of Malacca. But at the same time, China has a long-standing relationship with the United Wa State Army, which is a Maoist insurgent group that is opposed to the Burmese junta and has been engaged in on again, off again as part of this very complex civil war. There are other groups. They fight with the junta. They fight with each other. It's a very complex and rather sad situation. China wants enough stability to get what they want out of Burma, but they are not afraid to play the actors off against one another when it serves their benefit. For example, in 2011, I believe, there was a dam project that China was seeking to build just inside Burma to get hydroelectric power into southwestern China. The junta canceled it, and then all of a sudden the weapons flow to the United Wa State Army tripled. So they are not hesitant to use actors to their benefit.
Excellent, excellent. Anybody else from the panel?
Yeah, I'll comment. I think I think Burma is complicated. It's very complicated. Since 1947, there's been challenges there with the junta. I think there was a lot of optimism in the last decade with Aung San Suu Kyi. We thought that she was going to lead the country into a new era of democracy. Of course, that's since gone the other direction. It's been a roller coaster. I think the U.S., again, I love the fact that we do these forums because you can express your opinion. So I'm expressing my opinion. But I think we need to continue to engage Burma, need to continue to encourage them to pursue, to return to some form of a democratic government. And perhaps more importantly, given the emphasis on ASEAN centrality, I think we need to put a lot of emphasis and encouragement towards ASEAN to bring about solutions in Burma. But the PRC is clearly capitalizing on the situation in Burma, and I think we need to counter that message. There is another way, and we need to stay true to our values in doing so.
Anybody else from the panel?
Yeah,
Major
I'd
Prabowo?
like to have to add some a bit of point. So I think talking about Burma, I think the Asian perspective about this is like we don't really happy with what happened in Burma. Indonesian government as well already condemned this kind of act by the current junta. So I think currently Burma, talking about what the U.S. should do, I think in my opinion, like over there is kind of now it's like competition of influence. So talking about Burma, like everyone is not happy, but we cannot just avoid the relationship, or we just cut the diplomacy with the Burma. Because when we cut the diplomacy, we cannot really giving influence. We can't really give any suggestion to them or recommendation or help. So they will become like separated too much from us. I think what the U.S. can do in this case, like I think, as mentioned before, China already play a part in that, because like the Burma, after the junta, they have a bad life. They have a very hard life over there. And China tried to use that as an opportunity to maybe do something over there, increase the influence. I think having this competition of influence, the U.S. should think about what you can offer, or what you can do, or what we can do together with ASEAN to Burma, that the China would going to be hard to compete as well. That's my opinion.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Bab, is that answers your question? Great question, great answers, the panel. Now we're moving back to, we're moving to the outstations. The first question from the outstations. Ms. Hauk?
So the first question is, what support, and for example, economic, technological, or military, or et cetera, do Russia and China provide to Indonesia?
Who would like to begin with the answer?
Okay.
Major Prabowo.
So Russia and China?
Russia,
Support.
yes.
Okay.
Russia and China, yes.
About the support in terms of defense. In terms of defense, I think currently with Russia and China, I don't think we have enough, in my knowledge, we don't have enough, so many defense agreement with China. During my service in the Army, I think 12 years, I only have done like one joint exercise, sharp knife with the Chinese forces, and that's all I've done, or that's all I've seen. With Russia, we've never done any joint exercise. We only, so with China, I would say we have a very minimum defense cooperation with China. But Russia, the last cooperation we have is like, I think we have, we bought their Mi-17, Mi-35, that kind of helicopters. And I would say in terms of defense cooperation in Indonesia, I think the biggest one, I think I can still say that is still the U.S. We still buy a lot of equipment from the U.S. The joint exercise, joint cooperation, sending exchange about not only the student but also the instructor, we're pretty much doing it better with the U.S.
Anybody would like to add from the distinguished panel? Anybody? Okay, great. I cannot, unfortunately, talk to the outstation because it's outstation, but thank you for the question, and thank you for the great answer. So we go moving back to the Arnold. Who has the next question? Dr. Modinger, please.
I think I've heard a couple of you say that you think it's important that we not force these countries in the region to choose. What would you say to those on the other side of the fence that say, actually, this is a real problem because our strategy in that region, should it go hot with China, is predicated on a tight cooperation to include all kinds of host nation support and host nation agreements, presumably before things go hot. If we don't force countries to choose, then possibly we cannot develop and fortify those relationships that we would need come a conflictual situation. What do you say to that?
Okay, who would like to begin? Colonel McCaughrin, please.
I think you bring up a very good point. It's important to point out that the cooperation between Southeast Asian nations and China versus Southeast Asian nations with the U.S. tends to be very different. It tends to be more economic in scope with the PRC, whereas it's much more security focused. There's, of course, economic investment, but more as a company to, it's not so much the U.S. coming in as it is U.S. multinational corporations. It is a clear risk in the event that you are faced with a large-scale contingency in that part of the world. But the fact of the matter is, I've heard similar stories from other allies and partners in Southeast Asia with what Petrus said. The security relationship with China is actually quite limited. And it is a risk that we will have to live with and be cognizant of. But the concern I have, and this is me speaking personally, if we were to be too aggressive in forcing a choice, is that those agreements that we seek we'd never get to in the first place. And we also have to remember that a lot of those countries have fairly sizable diasporas of Chinese nationals, or at least people of Chinese heritage, that China does try to recruit. For influence purposes, I think Singapore is roughly 70% Chinese. I know Indonesia and Malaysia both have fairly sizable Chinese minorities, and that's, duplicated elsewhere as well. So there is always a bit of risk anyway, even if you don't get to the point of forcing a choice, or you do force a choice, you still have that to contend with.
Anybody else from the panel?
Yeah, I think that was well said. I think one of the concerns, unspoken concerns, is we don't want them to choose because we'd be afraid of who they would choose. Economically, these countries are very intertwined with China. China, the PRC is, in many, I think in most, if not all, Southeast Asian countries, is the #1 trading partner with the PRC. And we are not, the United States is not, wants the PRC to thrive, wants every country to thrive, wants a robust trading partnership, around the world. That's the whole nature of a free and open Indo-Pacific, that we can trade freely with countries. But I think from what I've observed, with most Southeast Asian countries that I've dealt with, there does tend to be an economic preference towards China. But there also tends to be, to what Lieutenant Colonel McCaughrin said earlier, there tends to be a security preference in many respects to the U.S. So these countries are often, they're in a difficult situation. They're maintaining that balance of relationships. And I think that is where we as U.S. need to have enough awareness of the diversity and the dynamism of the region to be able to navigate through that. And we can all benefit in this environment. So
Excellent. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think that's a good point about the balanced relationship. I think a lot of all of the countries in ASEAN, we always try to balance relationship, and I think by forcing the countries to choose sides, again, we're talking about an area or region that have like almost the bigger population compared to the rest part of the world combined together. So imagine like if a government, when the public knows that the government being forced to use or to choose sides, and then I would say that government will feel very hard to maintain the public trust and the legitimacy as well from the government. I think the government in every country in ASEAN always try to provide the people the good life, and having that balance where we can, which country we can provide, which country that can support us with the economy, which country we have like a defense cooperation. I think maintain that balance is I think that's the #1 priority in ASEAN. So I think it's going to be hard to make the countries in ASEAN to choose sides.
So essentially, what I'm hearing from each of you is that we have to satiate ourselves with the glacial pace of maybe a movement towards the West, because if we try and hasten it, we risk getting an outcome that we don't desire.
What would be a reply for that?
Yeah, I think this is a slow, long game across the board. I think the key thing to do is, the key approach is to continue to emphasize and focus on a rules-based international order. And the more that we, the United States and our allies and partners, adhere to that, the more, in one sense, the PRC has to adhere to that. And frankly, the PRC has benefited from a rules-based international order more than, you could argue, more than most countries have. It has facilitated their economic transformation over the past 30, 40 years. So that is, I think, where in my view, where our policy emphasis needs to continue to remain, is just continuing to emphasize and reinforce in the rules-based international order. And over time, the ideal is that we will all grow together. When the tide rises, all boats in the harbor raise together, and that's what we're aiming for.
Excellent, excellent. Dr. Madinja, that answers your question. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you for the answers. We're going back to the outstations. Ms. Hauk?
So Frank von Truss, he asks, does Russia and China conduct military exercises with Indonesia similar to the U.S. at the moment?
Yeah. Okay, I think I already answered it before. So yeah, with Russia and China we already did once. I need to confirm that one, but I think I only did once in my knowledge since 12 years in my service. Russia, we never did any joint exercise. So with Russia and China, in terms of defense cooperation, in terms of the personnel, we only send people in exchange for like a staff college. That's all I think I know. I think, yeah, I can say again, like, I think the better cooperation in terms of the personnel or exercises with the Western countries, including Australia. I can say that, especially Australia, I know that Australia is a key player here in ASEAN as well, and it's also a very close partner to the U.S. And like Australia is a very good partner of Indonesia as well. Our cooperation with Australia is also very good. And as a matter of fact, starting in 2019, we started exchange of instructor in over there. In fact, like, I'm the first Indonesian instructor in their Royal Military College, Dantrun. And also that's the same time where the Australian also sent an officers to our military academy. I think that kind of thing, that trust that we have always been maintained.
Excellent. Anybody else from the panel to add?
I think just writ large, I mean, you see how the U.S. does IMET programs. You know, you have outstanding officers like Major Prabowo and others who attend here. They're in class with U.S. students. They learn U.S. doctrine. They get a real full immersive experience with American officers, whereas what anecdotes I have heard of Southeast Asian and others that go to PLA schools, they're shunted off to their own little dormitory. They're taught some Chinese cultural knowledge, but it's really not a full-on immersive experience. The PLA kind of holds them at arm's length, and there's not a lot of real value in terms of better development as an officer coming out of those those exchanges that countries that have them with the PLA.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, like, I think I heard from one of the students that sent that do the staff college in China. I think even they separate the international student with the actual China student, so they don't really have that exposure to the China culture or even the other officers.
Excellent, excellent. Anybody else from the panel? You good? Okay. Thank you for the great question, outstation, and thank you for the great answers, the panel. So we go coming back to the Arnold. So we have two questions. You will be sir next, and then Dr. Dai, and then you, sir. Okay, please, you next. Mm-hmm.
Gentlemen, first of all, thank you for your time. Lieutenant Colonel Wozlik from DJMO. We talked a lot about aspects of DIME, both diplomacy quite a bit, economics and militarily. I'm going to tie that together with some of the comments already made. China, Xi Jinping in particular, has approached the PLA to talk about how he wanted to informationalize and intelligize the military. With the discussions that we've had so far, I'm curious if there's any trends and what those impacts are as you assess them, as they approach both regional information campaigns and then worldwide information campaigns. How does that play into some of the dynamics that you've experienced both in your studies and then in Indonesia itself? Over to you.
Anybody from the panel to begin with? Colonel McCaughrin, Colonel
Yeah, I
Kerber?
mean, I'll just speak broadly. I mean, they got their A game on. I mean, they're focused. You don't have to spend more than a day in anywhere in Southeast Asia without picking up a newspaper and seeing the degree in which advertising, marketing, articles advocate their view. I saw that in, walking around in Malaysia and in Singapore, and you can't blame them. I think they do, in one sense, a better job than we do in terms of getting our message across. And I think it's a challenge that I think the United States has a lot to grow in terms of being competitive in that space.
Yeah, I think
Yes, Colonel.
I'm sorry. You done? Yeah. Okay. The Chinese Communist Party, dating back to years, decades before it even had control of China, were masters of information operations. I remember a senior leader relating an anecdote. He traveled to Manila, and I'm sure Phil's seen exactly what I'm talking about. There is a cemetery in downtown Manila to veterans of the U.S. campaign to liberate the city in 1945. Across the street from this cemetery is a 40-story skyscraper that has Bank of China prominently displayed on it. Any one of these Belt and Road projects that you see in these countries, it's not just, you don't just see excavators, bulldozers, and what have you, cranes out there. They have Chinese flags on them. They have Chinese script on them. There's very much an effort to tie. Here we are, the PRC, and we are invested in your development. And we talk a lot about a whole of government approach. They are truly masters at it. It's not just the PLA that's out there. They are out there in full force, just advertising themselves as a force for good in the region, and kind of a new, we're getting our mojo back. We are still the Middle Kingdom. We are here for you. And what are you going to do for us?
Anybody else from the panel?
Yeah, but from Indonesia,
Indonesia,
about the China's information, I think, again, like, it's my opinion, like, I don't know, I don't really see the effect from the public, to the public perspective about the China's information warfare. I know it's because it's that good or because it's not there, because, like, I don't really see the effect of that information warfare. I think people always talk about the TikTok, something like that, and also, like, people always talk about there's one phone brand from the China also that as a tool for the China's information warfare to come into our countries. But I think in terms of the public, I think how I can measure this, I think from the public trust, I can say, as I mentioned before, the public perception about the China is still not changing throughout the years, and I don't think that if they have a good information operations, I think that's going to be their main goal. So I don't really think that it's even though it's there, I don't see any big effect on that.
Excellent. Anybody else from the panel? Okay, great. Since I promised, let's take two questions from the Arnold, and then we'll take 2 questions from outstations. We will a little bit, change the order. Dr. Dial, you're on the next, please.
Thank you. So it seems that Southeast Asian countries...
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Tirda Dai. I'm in the Dean's of Academic Office. And my question is based on some of the comments you made just now, that it seems that Southeast Asian countries' consensus-based decision-making and differences between member limits the number of issues that become priorities for Southeast Asia countries and U.S. relations. And nevertheless, last year, the Biden administration, through active diplomacy, they produced 2 commitments requiring congressional approval. First was granting ASEAN diplomatic privileges and immunities under U.S. law, and passed the House of Representatives with bipartisan support this last March. And the second commitment was doubling the size of the Young Southeast Asian Leaders Initiative program over 3 years. And then the House of Representatives sought and was granted observer status in ASEAN Inter-Parliamentary Assembly, APA, in the late 2022. And they were also participated in the Congressional Leader U.S. Asian Special Summit in May 2022. So I have two questions focused with ASEAN. My first question is that how does the consensus-based decision-making process with ASEAN impact the prioritization of issues in ASEAN-U.S. relations and how United States should be navigating this deep dynamic? My second question is how do the differences among ASEAN members states influence the effectiveness of ASEAN-U.S. relations, and what strategies are being employed to address these divergent interests?
Anybody from the panel?
I'll start.
Please, Colonel.
Yeah, I mean, the word diversity is so applicable to the 10 members of ASEAN. I mean, you have Buddhist, Muslim, Christian nations. You've got all forms of government, from military juntas, communist dictatorships, all the way through to flourishing democracies. It is hard but not impossible to get all 10 members on one page. That's precisely what China doesn't want. They want to continue to exploit bilateral relations and use leverage points where they can to preclude that unanimity. And not every issue is the same importance to every member of ASEAN. I mean, South China Sea, there's really it's the Philippines and Vietnam, Indonesia and Malaysia to a lesser extent. The other countries, even those that have some nominal water frontage, don't really have too much of a concern. So they want to continue to have a cooperative, all of them want to have a cooperative relationship with China. Some are less vested in the pressure of China's actions in the South China Sea than others. But I think it is important, you pointed out a lot of the agreements, and I think it's important and a good thing for the U.S. to treat ASEAN as such. I mean, you've got ASEAN is situated between the two largest countries on Earth in terms of population, and the collective population of ASEAN is roughly equivalent to either one of those. So being able to go to bat as a unified entity when and where they can, I think we need to continue to foster that and develop it. That's McCaughrin's opinion. That's not U.S. policy, but I think that's kind of the direction the administration wants to go as well.
Anybody else from the panel, please? Colonel Kerber?
Yeah, I think what's really critical is that we show up, right? I mean, we have these ASEAN events. We are not a member of ASEAN, but we're a partner. We're an invitee. And when we have these, when ASEAN holds these events, like I mentioned earlier, the ASEAN Defense Ministers meeting, we need to send our Secretary of Defense, right? When they're sending their presidents, their prime ministers, and so forth, we should be sending ours. That is a message in itself that typically results in influence. You know, if we take them seriously, they'll take us seriously. But the challenges of the consensus-based approach, I mean, those aren't going away. The important thing is that we continue to be engaged multilaterally, and also bilaterally. I mean, we have bilateral relationships with every country in the region. You know, and we cannot underemphasize those. But on the same note, we do believe in the centrality of ASEAN as an organization. But yeah, we have to show up. In previous administrations, that wasn't always the case. We would not send somebody of requisite position or authority to these events, and it's really our loss when we don't do that. So,
Anybody else? Major?
Yeah, it's like I told you before. I think maintain that communications or cooperations so that ASEAN country can still gain trust, can still trust U.S. presence in the region as well. Again, also about talking the consensus, the decision making. Like talking about decision-making within an Asian country doesn't mean that we can dictate, every country in Asia can dictate other countries to choose or to go to a specific direction. We still respect other government. We will not dictate internal policy of each country. So I think if the U.S. are able to show presence in the country, in the region, we will still able to maintain this status in the region. Like there will be, again, in my opinion, like I think there will be never a case where all of the Asian country like cutting all the diplomacy with the China. I think even the U.S., the China is still the biggest market. Like we all see other countries, like especially like Indonesia, we see countries as how we can benefit from each other. Like China, we can also benefit from their market as well. So yeah.
Excellent, excellent discussion. Is that answers your question, sir?
Well, I don't want to take the time, but the second part of my question was, how do you feel like the relationship among these countries, if there are differences between the countries, will affect our relationship, overall relationship with ASEAN, with their inner relationships they
A
have?
little bit different angle, kind of. Colonel McCaughrin?
Well, we still maintain bilateral relationships as well, and there are and will continue to be a lot of differences among the countries. I know one particular issue I remember dealing with was we had the Indo-Pacific Army Chiefs Conference in Bangkok in 2019, and Thailand, being the good neighbor that they are, wanted to invite a Burma representative. That caused a bit of friction with our State Department because of our discussions with the Burmese government, but it was something we ironed out. They were able to attend, albeit at a lower level. But those differences among ASEAN nations, it's something that we just have to accommodate. It requires a deft bit of diplomacy. We have to be able to play three-dimensional chess on this in terms of when there are differences, significant differences between ASEAN partners, we still need to be able to work well with both the individual countries and the entity as a whole.
Excellent. Is that answers your question,
Yes, sir.
sir?
Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the great answers and the great question to make sure that everybody's happy. So now we're going we promised another question from here. Please, sir, introduce yourself. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Major Prabowo, for pointing out the importance of the shipping lanes in this area. And I cannot help but be struck by the elements of Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia being key terrain in the competition and certainly in a conflict. And when we look back in not so distant history, that was not only key terrain, it was contested terrain, and the Allies were unable to use the Straits of Malacca for a number of years. I'm also aware, or at least I've read, that the straits there are about to reach their capacity for handling shipping. And there may be within about 10 years of this is all we can take, but the growth curve of shipping is likely to increase. So I've got a different kind of a question. Would the development of the Kra Canal across the isthmus there at Thailand be beneficial for reducing the competition for the use there in the Straits of Malacca so that it doesn't become a point of conflict? Over.
Thank you very much. Who would like to begin with the, yes, Colonel Kerber.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Strait of Malacca, it's strategic. It's a SLOC. We're talking 200 ships a day, $3.5 trillion worth of global trade any given year. It is yet again another example of the importance of Southeast Asia and ensuring stability in that region in a rules-based order. I think the PRC has made efforts. I'll defer to Lieutenant Colonel McCaughrin on this, but the PRC has made a lot of efforts to mitigate some of that, through their initiatives in Burma, to look at alternatives to bringing resource flows and so forth into the PRC. The Isthmus of Krull has been a topic of discussion for perhaps decades. Whether or not it ever comes to fruition is very much TBD, but I think just from a physics standpoint, would it relieve pressure on the Strait of Malacca? Yes, perhaps, very much so. I think the key, in my view, would be to ensure, international access to such an initiative, rather than see it monopolized by any one particular country. I don't think the U.S. has a policy on opposing such initiative. I think anything that can relieve that kind of strain, I think should be mutually beneficial to the region and the world.
Excellent. Anybody else from the panel?
I think it's important to point out, too, I think a big reason why, there's been a lot of talk but not a lot of action towards actually building the canal is just that's a very restive region. There's ongoing hot insurgencies down there in Thailand. I'm not so sure about the Burma side of the isthmus there, but it's been a big, again, to Colonel Kerber's point, I don't know of any intent by the U.S. to stand in the way of it being built, but I just know that there has not been a lot. It's always brought up as a good idea. I don't know, given that China will probably be the capital purchaser and actioner, if you will, of building it. There just hasn't been a whole lot of momentum yet behind the idea. But to your point, I've stood in top of a tall building in Singapore, and you see the log jam of ships trying to get through Malacca, and I'm sure off Jakarta at Sunda, it's much the same, just because it's such constricted maritime terrain. I don't know of any reason why we would oppose it. There's just a lot of friction precluding its being built at the moment.
Anybody else? Major, please.
Yeah, just want to add the point about is it gonna really release the tension in Malacca or something like that? Well, it's not a question. We can say that in terms of the shipping or the physical tension, yes, it will potentially can be reduced. But talking about creating another canal, do you think it will? Do you think there can be another hot spot over there or not? So I think, as also mentioned by McCaughrin, there's a lot of insurgency over there in Thailand as well. So I think having created try to create another pathway, again, comes with all of the risk. So it depends how the U.S. can see it. High reward, like high risk, gonna be high reward. So yeah, that's gonna be another question.
Anybody else from the panel? If that answers your question, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you for the question. Thank you, the panel, for the great answers. So we had 2 questions from the Arnold. Now we're moving back to the outstations for 2 questions. So the next question from Ms. Hauk.
So this user, I apologize for mispronouncing their name, Wayu. They indicate they're from Indonesia, and they had a 2-part question. One was more about how the U.S. will combat trust and how they will build trust, but we've spoke to that several times. So I wanted to move to the second part of their question was, considering factors such as geographic proximity, a defense and security-focused approach, and Southeast Asia's economic landscape, how does the U.S. intend to outcompete China's sphere of influence and strengthen its regional standing?
Okay. So this is the question for the distinguished panel. Who would like to begin with? Colonel McCaughrin.
I'll start.
Please.
Yeah, I think for one thing, as I just briefly touched on some of the historical cases, China has a certain amount of baggage in terms of its relations with these Southeast Asian countries. Everyone wants Chinese money. They don't necessarily want Chinese influence. And I think, the past history of one-way relationships, exploitation, not that the U.S. and other Western countries are innocent in that regard, but I think I won't provide the direct quote from Ho Chi Minh because it's not suitable to this forum. But at one point during the struggle against the French, in the early days of what became known as the Vietnam War, he was offered a meeting with the Chinese, and said he would rather sniff French manure for another 5 years than eat Chinese for another 1,000. So that comment, again, not a direct quote, but summarizing his point, did not indicate, even among brother communists, a very high view of the potential for corrosive Chinese influence in the region.
Anybody else from the panel?
Yeah, I think fundamentally we need to be the better option. It's a competitive space economically, militarily, across the dime, and I think the challenge to the United States is to be a better option for our Southeast Asia partners. It's competition, and it's in every way, shape, and form. I mean, we have the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. We attempt to get after that. We attempt to show that we're a better option. We definitely get after that when it comes to security cooperation. We've talked about, the different FMS programs that are out there that are pervasive throughout the region. We provide a better security option than the Chinese and the Russians. When you do FMS with the United States, you're not just doing you're not just doing the material solution. You're getting a relationship with the U.S. You're enhancing a relationship. That is one area in terms of competition that I think we do very well, and we just need to keep after that, I think is my answer.
Anybody else? Major?
Yeah, competition about influence, as I mentioned before, it's not just about business. It's not just about how to conduct trading between other countries, but how we merge, not merging, how we understand each other culture. Like if we see the example in, as I mentioned before, in China, like the staff college over there, the students are separated from the actual Chinese student. But here, like I can say, a lot of people argue about this. People always say this is the best year of my life, but my years before this is better than this. But I have a lot of friends here. I made a lot of friends. Like they become brothers to me. We have that kind of close relationship with each other. So I think that is one thing that is very important for the U.S. to be able to keep maintain.
Excellent discussion. So, as promised, we're going to take another question. Thank you, Outstation, for the great question, and thank you for the great answers. Another question from Outstations.
So, Mark Rowe asks, in view of President Xi Jinping's One China position coupled with PRC's continued modernization of its military, what are your thoughts or concerns of a future conflict or dispute of Taiwan?
Who would like to begin with the great question, with the answers?
I think it's important to remember that Taiwan provides an aim point for the PLA as a constant focus for its training, for its modernization. One thing I ask myself is what happens if they go after Taiwan and the coyote catches the roadrunner? Then what? I have to wonder at some point if while I'm sure a formal declaration of independence would necessarily trigger a cross-strait invasion, I'm not so sure that a lot of the rhetoric is not just, hey, we need to sharpen our focus, we need to be prepared for this, so that if we are pushed to do so, we can do it. In terms of how that affects Southeast Asia, I mean, the countries don't want to face a choice, and it's important to remember Taiwan's down to, I believe, 11 was the last count of diplomatic allies, none of which are in Southeast Asia. All of them have endorsed some variant of the One China policy, where they say there's one China, the capital's in Beijing. The U.S. has done the same in the Shanghai Communique in 1972. So I don't know that you're going to get a lot of pushback, but clearly China knows that it's a very, very high-risk endeavor to attempt such a military operation, and it also takes away a key psychological aim point for their military.
Excellent, excellent. Anybody else from the panel? Colonel Kerber?
Yeah, maybe I'll just echo some of the sentiments of Admiral Aquilino. Conflict is not inevitable, right? That is not how we view the situation with Taiwan. We are very focused and very determined to build our integrated deterrence across all domains with our allies and partners and make any kind of decision that would involve Taiwan in a forceful way very, very costly. Nobody, U.S., PRC, nobody wants to give up their only sons to a conflict in the region. And I think we've been very focused on ensuring peace and ensuring that, that rules-based order. And as long as we keep the eye on that prize, I think we'll all benefit, to include the PRC.
Excellent. Major, anything
Yeah,
to add?
the rule-based order and one China policy. I think that's two things that looks similar, but it's different, but it's similar. I mean, I think, like the U.S., Indonesia, we all accepting or understanding one China policy, and by doing that, China will also feel like Taiwan is theirs, but U.S. feel like Taiwan is not Chinese. So I think, rather than we're thinking about what happened if this happened, like what happened if this happened, I think we need to be able to focus on how to yes, it's inevitable, but how to minimize the effect or how to try to avoid these things. If we can maintain the rule-based order, if we can maintain, we can assure China that taking Taiwan by force will create a catastrophic damage for PRC as well. We already kind of influence them as well. So I think that's one of the important things we have to do, like not only consider about what if that happening, but how we minimize the effect of that.
Excellent, excellent discussion. Great question and great answers. Anybody else to add before we move on? Excellent, excellent. So is everybody's doing well so far? Excellent. So we still have very little time. We're going back to Arnold. Arnold, anybody has a question? Yes, sir. Introduce yourself. Ask your question. Yes, it's up. It's up. You don't have to do anything.
Good afternoon, sir. My name is Major Fitrawan from Indonesia. Major Prabowo friends. So I remember in 2021, Indonesian Minister of Investment Affairs spoke to the media about the reason why Indonesia likes to have investment cooperation or investment agreement with China. He said that China is the only country that does not impose many conditions when it comes to investment with Indonesia. The minister also said that at the same time, United States always gives a number of complicated requirements when Indonesia invites United States to invest in Indonesia. And I met the minister several times, and also from his staffs, I also have an insight or they told me about stereotype about negotiating with the United States. He told us that it is always harder or more difficult to negotiate with United States rather than China in terms of bureaucracy. So my question is, in the free and open Indo-Pacific strategy, is there any significant change in the approach of United States to Southeast Asia countries? By this, I mean, are the requirements becoming easier or just stay the same? So the stereotypes in the bureaucracy will stay the same. Thank you.
Very much. Well, the great question. The panel, who would like to begin? Colonel Kerber?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it is challenging to negotiate anything with any country, especially the United States, when it comes to ensuring our rules-based approach to how we do things. I think that's something that you do have to deal with when you deal with the United States. We are very transparent, and part of being transparent, I think, is being thorough and lining out what our stipulations are, what things constrain and benefit us, and I think that transparency, I think, often results in some complexity when it comes to negotiating with the United States. But the flip side of that transparency is you get a lot of honesty, right? You get a lot of factualness that minimizes other nefarious purposes that may be out there when it comes to negotiating with another nation. Can we improve? I think there's always room for improvement and refining such processes. I don't claim that we are perfect in how we do that. But yeah, that's a very good question. And I think you can go down different branches on that too, in terms of what we're negotiating, whether it's a fiscal trade agreement focused negotiation, whether it's a defense-related negotiation. But one thing I'll guarantee to you is that the United States is pretty thorough and pretty transparent in terms of how we move out on that, on those initiatives. Yeah.
Anybody else from the panel? Okay. Because it's Friday, we really appreciate the fact that most of you stayed with us, beared with us until now. It's really amazing. It's Friday, So it's been full house in the beginning. We just lost few people, but most of you stayed. That's really appreciated. So that's why we want to appreciate your time for Friday to spend your times with families. We want to finish a little bit early. It's almost time. It's scheduled until 1500. So millions of questions and comments from outstations and million questions and comments from here. Please send them, and we're going to show you our contact information that you can send them to us, to the castle, and we will be happy to convey them to the panel to answer those questions or reply to the comments. So, next slide, please. Go to the capabilities, please. So this is our capabilities across the country and globally. This is our partners. The range of the partners are constantly expanding in Europe and elsewhere, and we have a lot of partners in the United States. Think tanks, universities, organizations, etc. Next slide, please. So the final slide contains our contact information for any related questions. Please send your questions, comments to you can call this number and you can access me on Global. Okay? And this is the code you can access with your phone. This is the code you can access with your phones for Castle website capabilities. On behalf of all of us, I would like to thank our panel for sharing their great and very insightful expertise and analysis with us. This concludes our session. Heads up. We look forward to seeing you again on 19th of March here in Arnold, the same time, for another great discussion with a high-level State Department keynote speaker, and in addition to 3 great panel members. So we do that all the time. We invite outside scholars or high-level government employees to travel here in person to share their expertise in support of your missions. Thank you very much for attending the panel today, the session today, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a great weekend.